There are conversations that never leave a clubhouse. Words exchanged in the private spaces of professional baseball, between innings, in the tunnel beneath a stadium, in the quiet corner of a dugout where two people can speak without being heard by the 20 other people sitting within arm's reach, that carry a weight and an intimacy that the public version of the sport never gets to see. These conversations are where the real game happens. Not the game on the field. Not the statistical record of pitches thrown and balls hit and runs scored that fills the box scores and feeds the analysis that the baseball world consumes in the hours after every game. But the other game. The one that happens between the ears and between teammates. The one that decides, long before the first pitch of any given game is thrown, what kind of performance is possible and what kind of person is required to produce it. Yoshinobu Yamamoto has kept one of these conversations private for longer than it deserved to stay private. Until now. What Shohei Ohtani said to him after the first inning, the specific words, delivered in the specific moment when everything about Ohtani's return to the mound was still uncertain, still fragile, still existing in the territory between comeback and collapse that every pitcher who has ever recovered from serious injury knows intimately, has been sitting with Yamamoto in the way that important things sit with people who understand their significance. Not as a burden. As a treasure. Something private and true and more revealing about who Ohtani actually is than any statistic, any highlight, any carefully constructed public narrative about the most celebrated player in baseball. And when Yamamoto finally spoke, when the story behind Ohtani's comeback pitching came out in the specific, unhurried way that Yamamoto tells things, with the quiet authority of someone who was there and knows exactly what happened, the US media stopped everything it was doing and paid attention. Because what Ohtani said after the first inning was not what anyone expected. It was not confidence. It was not the declaration of a champion reasserting his dominance. It was not the kind of statement that gets turned into a quote graphic and shared across 1,000 platforms as evidence of a great player's unshakable belief in himself. It was something smaller than that. And something much, much larger. Stay with us. Because the story behind Ohtani's comeback pitching, told through the eyes of the teammate who was closest to it, who heard the words that nobody else heard, who watched from a distance of inches what the rest of the world watched from a distance of miles, is the most human story baseball has told this year. To understand the weight of what Ohtani said to Yamamoto after that first inning, you have to understand what the return to the mound actually meant. Not just athletically. Not just in terms of the surgical recovery and the physical rehabilitation and the months of carefully managed progression from throwing programs to bullpen sessions to the moment when a medical staff and a coaching staff and an organization looked at all of the available evidence and made the decision that the body had healed sufficiently to be trusted with the demands of major league pitching again. That part of the story, the clinical, measurable, objectively verifiable part, had been covered extensively. Every step of the recovery had been documented and analyzed and discussed by the baseball world with the thoroughness that the sport reserves for its most significant players and its most significant developments. What had not been covered, what could not be covered, because it existed in a space that cameras and reporting cannot reach, was the internal experience. What it feels like to be Shohei Ohtani, standing on a major league pitching mound for the first time after surgery. After the months of wondering. After the patient, grinding, never guaranteed process of rebuilding something that had broken. After the private moments that recovery always contains, the setbacks that don't make it into the public timeline, the days where the progress feels insufficient, the nights where the gap between where the body currently is and where it needs to be seems wider than any reasonable timeline can close. What does it feel like to be on that mound again? Ohtani told Yamamoto. Not in a press conference. Not in the carefully managed media availability that surrounds every significant moment in a major league career. In a brief, private exchange after the first inning had concluded and both men were in the same space and Yamamoto looked at his teammate and asked the question that needed to be asked. "How are you?" And Ohtani answered. Before we arrive at the words themselves, it is worth understanding why Yamamoto is the person who received them. Because Ohtani does not speak this way to everyone. His public persona, warm, engaged, accessible in the specific way that great athletes learn to be accessible without ever fully opening the door to the private person behind the public performance, is carefully maintained. Not dishonestly, but with the awareness of someone who understands that genuine privacy is a limited resource that must be protected deliberately in an environment where every word and gesture is potentially public. The people he speaks to differently, the people who receive the version of Ohtani that exists beneath the public performance, are few. And they are specific. Yamamoto is one of them. Their connection predates their shared experience as teammates in America. It is rooted in the specific bond that Japanese players who navigate the major leagues together develop, a bond built partly from shared cultural experience, partly from the particular challenge of performing at the highest level of an American sport while maintaining an identity and a set of values that are not primarily American, and partly from the simple human reality that when you are far from home, in an environment that is demanding and scrutinizing and relentless in its expectations, the people who understand where you came from become more important than they might be in other circumstances. Yamamoto and Ohtani understand each other in a way that requires less explanation than most relationships require. Which is why, after the first inning of Ohtani's comeback start, when Yamamoto asked how he was, the answer was real. Not the answer Ohtani would give to a reporter. Not the answer designed to project confidence and protect the narrative of a smooth, untroubled return. The actual answer. The one that contained the truth of what was happening inside a man who had just done something that months of preparation had been building toward and that no amount of preparation can fully simulate. To understand the answer, you have to understand the first inning itself. Comeback starts carry a specific kind of pressure that regular starts do not. The preparation is the same, the study of opposing hitters, the pitch sequencing decisions, the physical warm-up that prepares the arm for the demands of a major league outing. All of that is identical. What is different is everything underneath the preparation. The awareness, present in every pitch, that this is the first time. That the arm has not been here before in its current form, rebuilt, recovered, returned to service but not yet proven at this level in this context against this quality of opposition. That each pitch is simultaneously a baseball event and a test of whether everything the recovery promised is actually, in the moment of competitive truth, delivering what it promised. The first batter of the first inning produced a pitch that Ohtani located exactly where he intended to locate it. The second produced another. The third at-bat was more complicated. A hitter who had done his preparation, who had identified a tendency in Ohtani's pre-surgery approach and arrived at the plate looking for the pitch that tendency suggested was coming. The count went deep. Pitches were fouled off. The kind of at-bat that tells a pitcher more about the condition of his current stuff than any bullpen session ever could. Ohtani navigated it. Not easily. Not with the fluid dominance of a healthy, fully confident ace operating at the peak of his powers. But competently. Professionally. With the specific quality of a pitcher who is managing something, managing the gap between where he is and where he wants to be, between what his arm is currently capable of and what it was capable of before the injury and what it will eventually be capable of again. The first inning ended with the scoreboard where it needed to be. And Ohtani walked off the mound toward the dugout with everything he had just experienced contained inside him, not yet visible to anyone watching from the outside. Until Yamamoto asked. Shohei told me this after the first inning. When Yamamoto began this sentence in the conversation that the U.S. media has been unable to stop discussing, the room he was speaking in became very quiet. Not because people were being deliberately respectful of a moment they recognized as significant. But because the quality of attention that Yamamoto's telling produced, the unhurried, specific, clearly remembered quality of someone recounting something they have been carrying with them, created its own silence. Ohtani told Yamamoto that he was scared. Not in those exact words. The translation from the language in which it was said to the language in which it is being reported carries its own complications. The specific emotional vocabulary of one culture does not always map cleanly onto the emotional vocabulary of another, and what Ohtani expressed to Yamamoto in the private language of their shared understanding had a texture that any translation flattened somewhat. But the core of it, the thing that Yamamoto received and has been carrying since and finally chose to share, was this. Standing on the mound in that first inning, Ohtani had felt something he had not expected to feel. Something that all of the preparation and all of the recovery and all of the months of building toward this moment had not fully prepared him for. Doubt. Not about his ability. Not the paralyzing, confidence-destroying doubt that ends careers and turns talented players into former talented players. But the specific, honest, completely human doubt of someone doing something enormously significant for the first time after a long absence and discovering that the gap between preparation and execution contains something that only the execution itself can reveal. He had been scared. And he had gone out there anyway. And the first inning had happened. And it had been enough. That was what he told Yamamoto. And Yamamoto, receiving it, understood immediately why it mattered. The reaction from American baseball media to Yamamoto's revelation has been immediate, widespread, and unusually unanimous for a sports media landscape that typically produces vigorous disagreement about almost everything. The consensus is this: what Ohtani's admission reveals about him is more significant than almost anything his performance on the mound that day revealed. Because the story that has been constructed around Ohtani, carefully, over years, built from genuine evidence of genuine superhuman consistency, is a story in which doubt does not feature prominently. In which fear is not part of the vocabulary. In which the challenges that break ordinary players and test great ones seem to pass through Ohtani without leaving the visible marks they leave on everyone else. It is a compelling story. It is largely true. The evidence for it is overwhelming and consistent and drawn from a career's worth of performances in high-pressure situations that support the conclusion that Ohtani's relationship with pressure is fundamentally different from most people's relationship with it. But it is not the complete story. The complete story includes the first inning of a comeback start and a quiet admission to a trusted teammate that the moment had produced something unexpected. That the human inside the legend had felt what humans feel when they step into enormous moments without the full certainty that the moment will go the way they need it to go. Fear. Doubt. The honest vulnerability of a person doing something that matters enormously with an outcome that cannot be guaranteed. The US media is discussing this so intensely because it changes the Ohtani story in a way that makes it more compelling, not less. Because the version of Ohtani who felt scared in that first inning and went out there anyway is a more interesting, more human, more genuinely inspiring figure than the version who felt nothing and simply performed. Yamamoto gave the baseball world the complete story. And the baseball world recognized immediately that the complete story was better than the incomplete one. Here is what makes Yamamoto's decision to finally share this moment significant beyond the content of what he shared. He understood, in receiving Ohtani's admission after the first inning, that what he was being given was not weakness. It was not a vulnerability to be protected and never spoken of, a private moment of doubt to be buried beneath the public performance of confidence that the baseball world expects from its greatest players. It was the opposite of weakness. It was the most honest possible description of what courage actually is. Courage is not the absence of fear. Every person who has ever done something genuinely difficult knows this, knows it from personal experience in a way that makes the popular mythology of fearless greatness feel slightly false. Courage is the decision to proceed in the presence of fear. To take the mound when the doubt is real and the stakes are enormous and the arm has not been here before in this form and there are no guarantees about how the next pitch will go. Ohtani took the mound. In the presence of doubt. In the presence of fear. With the full awareness that what he was attempting might not go the way months of preparation had been building toward. He took the mound anyway. And Yamamoto, standing close enough to receive the admission that followed, understood that what he was witnessing was not a great player being vulnerable. It was a great player being fully, completely, courageously human. That understanding is what made him keep the story long enough for it to mean what it means. And what eventually made him share it. The US media will continue to discuss what Yamamoto revealed. The analysis will continue, about what Ohtani's admission means for our understanding of his psychology, about what it reveals about the nature of elite performance and the internal experience of athletes who make it look effortless from the outside, about what it tells us about the specific bond between two Japanese players navigating the demands of Major League Baseball together. All of that analysis is worth having. But here is what will remain when the analysis is finished. Shohei Ohtani stood on a Major League pitching mound for the first time after surgery. After months of recovery and preparation and the patient, grinding process of rebuilding something that had broken. After all of it, the clinical work, the physical rebuilding, the preparation that no one else could fully see or measure. He felt fear. And he threw the first pitch anyway. And after the inning ended and the scoreboard was where it needed to be and the first step of the comeback had been taken, he turned to the teammate who was close enough to ask and true enough to receive an honest answer. And he told the truth. Not the truth of the press conference. Not the truth of the public performance. The actual truth. The small, human, completely real truth of a person who had just done something enormous and was still, in the immediate aftermath, feeling the full weight of what it had cost to do it. Yamamoto received that truth. Carried it carefully. And when the time was right, when the story had settled enough to be told without losing what made it true, he shared it. The US media reacted with the attention that genuine truth always commands when it arrives in a space where managed narratives have been the primary currency. Because this is the story beneath the comeback. Not the pitches. Not the velocity readings or the spin rates or the analytical framework that the sport uses to measure what a pitcher's arm is currently capable of producing. The fear. The decision. The first pitch thrown in the presence of doubt. And a teammate close enough to receive the truth of it. That is the story of Ohtani's comeback pitching. And it is the best story baseball has told this year.